Good evening. I'll call our council meeting to order at 6 p.m. Hello to colleagues on council. We have Councillor Duncan joining us via Zoom. Good evening, Councillor Duncan. And to my far right, we have Councillor Duck, Councillor Garnett, myself, Mayor McNeil-Smith. To my far left, Councillor Novick, Councillor O'Keefe, and Councillor Rintoul. Good evening to members of staff who are joining us in the chamber this evening. And good evening to members of the public and to our presenters and to those who may be watching the live webcast. I want to begin with the territorial acknowledgement and say that we respectfully acknowledge that the land on which we gather for this meeting is the traditional territory of the Saanich nations, the Saanich people, which includes the Sawat Nation, the Sartlip Nation, the Pakwachin Nation, the Sycam Nation, and the Malahat Nation. We'll turn to approval of the agenda. We just have one change. We have no additional information for tonight's agenda since it was published last Thursday. But we have one change on the agenda, and Councillor Garnett has requested that we raise the letter of correspondence under 15.2 from the Lochside Drive residents, and that will become correspondence item 14B, which Council will discuss briefly. And with that amendment, I would seek a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? The motion carries. Thank you. We're now turning to public participation. We'll shortly begin our regular public participation period, but I just wanted to note that we do have two development variance requests this evening, and we will have presenters for those two requests. And as the public may know, that after development variance requests, we do allow a special public participation period immediately following the presentation. So I'll ask if there's anyone wishing to come forward to address council this evening on other items than those two, and I'll call for a first time if anyone would like to come forward. Good evening.
Good evening, Councillor. Daniel Shell and I live in Sidney. I want to speak tonight on the draft strategic plan. I was confused to see in the agenda for today's meeting that Council will be asked later on to approve an amended agenda for the February 20th Committee of the Whole to include late items that were not in the package for that meeting. I'm talking about the black line version of the draft strategic plan, the final draft, and the February 16th letter from the consultant. I didn't quite understand how these documents were deemed to be late, because it seems to me that strategic plans were documents prepared by the town. They were documents prepared by staff, and the letter from the consultant was the 16th. I would have thought they would have been available to be distributed at that time. I guess the reason I'm raising that is that this was the first meeting that we had the chance to see the strategic plan, which had been in a public forum. It had been developed behind closed doors, as we know. There was I found it surprising that there was nothing on the screens when the presentation was taking place. So I was sat in the audience that day, listening to what the consultant said, and it was completely lost. I would have thought we would have had it on the screen, and we could have looked at perhaps the black line version and the final draft to see kind of what changed. So I was very surprised that happened, and I didn't think the presentation was really, to me, that helpful in explaining what was going on. You guys were involved, obviously, in the discussion of the plan, but I thought it wasn't that helpful. I think it was a lost opportunity, and people looking at the recording of the meeting won't have any idea either than what the consultant was saying. So setting that aside, I know now we've got till March 11th to speak to the plan, and I wanted to just take a couple of minutes to talk about that. The conclusion of various initiatives in the plan to respond to new provincial legislation on housing, on OCP amendments, zoning bylaws, housing assessment amendments, that was totally expected, so I wasn't surprised to see that. On the plus side, I was very pleased to see a new action item under Goal 5, Organizational Excellence. This item calls for the creation of a policy framework that will provide annual status updates for all community plans. That's really welcomed. I know that a number of us have been sort of asking for that thing, and to give us a chance to know kind of what was planned, what actually happened, and what didn't happen, and perhaps why. I think that's a really good initiative on the part of the town, and I'm very pleased that that's going forward. The biggest weakness in the plan, in my mind, is around community engagement. There's only one action item in that section, the Citizen Satisfaction Survey for late 2025. I think Sidney needs to do a much better job in communicating with residents. The need for better public engagement was also seen as a priority in the people who attended the Sidney Community Association event in January. And I would note that the OCP includes language which calls for a clear and timely engagement with community members. This is in the implementation section of the OCP. I go on, it says, the intent is to keep community members informed about any major initiatives, to enable members to provide input, to ensure a high degree of transparency, to foster relationships and build trust, and, in my page here, and to have results and to result in a well-supported, well-understood plan, strategies, and policies. That seems to be our objective, and I think this is missing from the plan. By way of example, I think a more robust communications plan could include consultations and open meetings, town halls if you want, on a variety of topics. One, the impact on Sidney of the provincial government's recently announced suite of changes in housing policy. People need to understand kind of what that might mean for us going forward. And next one would be the new zoning bylaw as it's being developed, especially in regards to the impact of the bylaw on the look and feel of the downtown core. This issue has been with us perennially for a long time. What do we mean by downtown Sidney, the small town? What did the look and feel? That's something I think we should have. Emergency preparedness and response to major disasters. We had a presentation a few weeks ago, council, where the fire chief talked about work going on in terms of emergency preparedness and some discussion about the water supply in an event of a catastrophic event on the peninsula. We're at the end of the pipeline. We're the furthest to be from soup. And so the question is, what happens when a major event happens? Where's the water going to come from? And I understood that the CRD has like 2 water trucks, and you could probably serve 10,000 people. So what does this mean for us? And I know that the town had wells at some point, and I thought 3 wells might be
Mr. Gelinas, I'm just going to interject for a moment. I've been generous in allowing more than 4 minutes. Some of those details, I think, will come out in reports. I think you're summarizing about the need, the areas you're requesting greater engagement. If you could summarize,
okay,
please.
Fine, I'll just continue. Another area would be maybe eventually climate change and sea rise levels as the impact on the town. And finally, at a later date, the future of the Beacon Wharf. There's certainly going to be a tremendous amount of interest in that. And in a few years from now, whatever happens with the ferry terminal, if it turns out that Washington State doesn't come back, what do we do with that piece of land? So there are lots of areas in the short term and in the longer term, I think, would benefit from a more concerted strategy plan to consult citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming forward this evening. I'll call for a second time if there are other speakers to address council under general public participation. Call for a third and final time. Seeing none, I'll close the general part of public participation, and we'll move to the first of 2 presentations this evening. And I'm pleased to welcome Staff Sergeant Conley from our Sidney North Saanich RCMP detachment, and Constable Tim Crosgrove. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I brought my backup tonight. So I have Constable Tim Crosgrove, who's our community policing officer, to come and to share a little bit of information about crime prevention, community policing initiatives, things that he's been working on over the past year. So I'll turn the time over to Tim for a little bit, and then I'll follow up with a little bit on crime trends.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. First of all, I just want to thank you for having me here, and just want to say how thankful I am to be working in Sidney North Saanich. It's such a beautiful town. I'd been here a couple times before I got posted here, and I saw the beauty of it, but it wasn't until I worked here for a while that you see what a great community of people it is. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm a Nova Scotian, born and raised in Halifax, so it was a pretty easy adjustment to come live and work in the CRD. A lot of similarities there. I've been an RCMP officer for 15 years, all of which fortunately have been on Vancouver Island, from Ladysmith, Port McNeill. A lot of that time was spent working in Indigenous communities. So while in Ladysmith, I worked a lot on Penelakut Island and the community of Gelinas. In Port McNeill, I was the Indigenous policing officer for Cayuquit, Ahadasat, and Ucklagee, which are on the west coast. So it's a bit about me. For the last year and a half, I've been fortunate enough to be in the community policing role, which previously it hadn't been filled in a little bit. I'll talk a bit about some of the roles that encompasses, starting with the school liaison officer. So in this role, involves a lot of safety talks, presentations. If a issue arises at one of the schools, the staff will usually consult with me, and I'll come up with some sort of a talk, or sometimes isolated small groups of students, sometimes whole classes or grades. Engaging with youth in positive ways, just being at the school as much as possible, whether it's playing basketball or throwing a ball around or just talking to kids about what I do, what police do. Assisting staff with high-risk youth. So if a situation arises, we need to meet with parents and come up with safety planning, different things. Traffic safety, so just being around the schools in the morning and sometimes after school to ensure cars are going the right speed. One initiative that was restarted last year is the police camp. So that's a Greater Victoria Police Foundation have provided funding for a CRD police camp, which accepts high school students to a week-long camp at the military base, the Esquimalt military base. This year it's at Albert Head. Kids learn a bit about what policing is as a career. It's also just more of a leadership camp. They have a good time, learn lots, and something great to add to the resume. Another big part of my role has been community events. So last summer was they restarted the Sidney Night Market, as you guys know. So we were there just about every Thursday with a table, engaging with the public, talking to seniors about fraud, or anybody who would listen about fraud, how to prevent yourself from falling victim to fraud, a bit about recruiting, engaging with youth, handing out stickers and tattoos, and a lot of talking to tourists. I didn't realize how many, I feel like every other person I talked to was from Europe or from the States or somewhere, so that was good. Parades, so the Christmas parade, was at the last couple of those, the Freedom of the Town parade just a few weeks ago, and events like Canada Day. Spent the evening at the park there for the presentations, and then after the parade, the festivities down at Iroquois Park. Another big role of mine has been supporting the unhoused population. So this has involved introducing myself to anybody who finds themselves in Sidney for any amount of time. We do have quite a few transient people that will come for a couple days and go, who I might not touch base with, but anybody who finds themselves here for any length of time, I'll engage with, get to know them on a one-on-one basis, find out what their needs are. Then I work with Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction out of Victoria. They come out once a week, meet with me. We talk about who needs to get on a housing list, who might need some social assistance. We'll meet up with them and make sure that happens. So working with agencies such as the food bank, they're in touch with a lot of unhoused and also housing insecure people in town. So we do a good job liaising and figuring out who needs some assistance. Also helping with businesses and property owners that may be negatively affected by the unhoused population. So just working to see how we can mitigate their problems. Another role is volunteer management. So COVID pretty well decimated our volunteers at the detachment. There's a few years there where nobody was able to help. In the past year and a half, we've bolstered our speed watch numbers, and we're hoping to do like a block watch, get that back up and running. We've also got a handful of student volunteers, most of which are in like a criminology program that are just looking for some hours, but getting them engaged and teaching them a bit about what RCMP do. We wouldn't have been able to man the table at the night market without one particular student's help. Senior outreach. So as we all know, the demographic of Sidney, there's quite a few people over the age of 60. I work to help reduce fraud, so we do a lot of fraud presentations. I've got a big one tomorrow afternoon at the Mary Winspear, another one at St. Andrew's Church on Wednesday. I probably average 1 or 2 a month. Sometimes the small groups, like at a senior's home, sometimes the bigger groups at the Shoal Center or Mary Winspear. Also working with ICBC on things like aging and driving. Also pedestrian and mobility scooter safety talks. Also working as the business liaison officer, so spent the last year and a half introducing myself to as many business owners and staff at businesses as I've possibly been able to. Offering advice on how to improve security, reduce theft, that sort of thing. Just touching base, letting them know we're available for any questions, and handing out my cards so that if they have any non-emergent questions, they can feel free to email me. And lastly, just working with community partners. So building relationships with other government departments, such as Sidney BYLAWS. Actually, Cliff's been amazing helping out with the unhoused issues. Working with Public Works, Town of Sidney office staff, Beacon Community Services, Shoal Center, the library, Mary Winspear, just making sure that staff there know that we support them and we're there to help if they have any needs that aren't emergencies. So, like, for example, the Mary Winspear a few months ago had issues with unhoused people sleeping under their awnings, like near their doors. So we did a talk to their staff and just let them know, things they could do to help make the spot safe. We also worked with unhoused people that were staying there to solve that problem. So yeah, just a few of the things I've been doing. I'll pass the mic back to Wayne.
Actually, if I may, thank you, Constable Cosgrove. We certainly appreciate the presentation. Just if Staff Sergeant Conley's okay, perhaps if we could just have any questions from colleagues on community policing while Constable Cosgrove is available. Councillor Dutt.
Yes, thank you, Constable. And I just want to pass on comments I've had from the unhoused. I've met with a couple of them, and how appreciative they are of your approach. And quite often you're the first or second official they get to get greeted by in Sidney, and they have expressed just how much care you're taking in helping them resolve their situation, and usually that's not in a good situation. So I just want to pass on our appreciation from the town for the work you do with our staff and the unhoused in mitigating the problems that come up with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Really glad to hear the focus you're putting on the fraud stuff with the seniors. I was a potential victim.
Oh, I think I've received emails from.
Well, I don't think so.
No, your email wasn't. Okay.
No, I didn't send it in. But yeah, it was one of those situations where I got a call late at night, apparently from my son, saying he'd been in an accident. He needed, all that thing. And although I had heard presentations like yours about, that this sort of thing happens, it's interesting when it actually happens to you, and when you think it's your child on the phone in trouble. But I did have the, thanks to presentations like yours and the information that's out in the community, I knew that this is probably bogus. So I quickly contacted my son on the other line and confirmed it wasn't an issue. And so that was fine. However, his father got the same phone call an hour later, and unfortunately gave this person several $1,000s. So for people who think that it would never happen to them, it does happen. So I share that story just for that, that reason. And that it's good that you guys are out there telling people this, because it is happening in our community. So thanks for that. Also, on the unhoused persons, I think it's great to hear what you're doing, because there is a lot of interest in that topic in our community. So, and people often wonder, how are they taken care of? So it sounds like you guys are doing a good job checking in on them and finding resources. So thank you for that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe, for sharing that with us. Seeing no other speakers, I just want to thank you, Councillor Cosgrove, for your work in community policing and media relations in all facets that you've described tonight, and especially the participating in some of the community events. Having seen the Thursday night summer markets, it looks like you were fully engaged with members from all across our community. I think it was a great opportunity, not only in that event, but in other events that you've participated in. So thank you again for the work across all areas in community policing.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I guess I will be part two and try to make it quick. So this was intended to be kind of a year-end report for 2023, and the previous report was sent a while ago. And I'm going to just touch briefly on our resource levels and the crime trends that we saw over 2023, just to capture that for you. So a brief update on the detachment resource levels and vacancy management. We have a little bit of an exodus happening. We have some recent promotions and transfers that are a complement to the experience of some of the detachment members who are moving on to new positions, and but it comes as a bit of a loss to the detachment and to the community. Our Corporal Kara Gubbins, who's been in charge of our major crime unit, has been promoted. She's going to Souk Detachment as the operations NCO. She leaves in 2 weeks. Our operations NCO, Sergeant Colin Cook, has been selected as the new detachment commander for Shawnigan Lake, and he will leave us in May. One of our watch commanders, Corporal Brittany Hasty, is transferring to a new position in London, Ontario, and she departs this next week. We were successful in retaining one of our members who was promoted locally into a watch commander position. That's Corporal Ian Patchett, so happy to have him stay with us. So I'm actively working with our staffing personnel to find replacement members. It's challenging, but we will get there, and that's in progress as we go. 2023 crime trends. So we've already talked a little bit about fraud. I'll start off with saying that we saw a whopping 25% increase in the number of reported fraud scams that involved a loss. The dollar loss far exceeded the previous year in 2022, despite considerable media and awareness education that we've been doing. These scams have become more enticing, more convincing than ever. We encourage community members to stay informed on this issue, to adopt prevention practices, and to not engage in interactions or share any personal information only to known and trusted sources. Family members, bank employees, the police can assist. We have Tim, in his promotion of fraud scam awareness, has a brochure that has 7 rules to follow, and it's helpful just to have it somewhere near a phone, near your computer. So we continue to promote that piece of information because it kind of simplifies things for community members. Moving on, we saw an increase in stolen vehicles in 2023. The number of stolen vehicles was a total of 11, which maybe doesn't seem like a high number, but it was considerably more than the year before. Some of these thefts of vehicles occurred from secure underground parking, condo underground parking, and others from the street. Most of the vehicles, but not all, were recovered. Our investigations determined a prolific vehicle theft offender from Up Island was involved in some of these car theft incidents, so those investigations have been ongoing. In 2023, we saw a steep climb in the number of possess and distribute child pornography investigations. We did 20 investigations in the past year. We're working on 20 investigations, I should say. The investigation work required on these cases is extensive. We are finding these cases are expensive to investigate. They require specialty tech crime expertise. For some aspects of the investigation, they're very labor intensive. We saw some variance in traffic accident and traffic enforcement patterns in 2023. There were increases in both injury and property damage accident levels, but zero, I'm happy to report, zero fatalities in the past year. Impaired driving and violation ticket enforcement levels remain comparable to the previous year. We still do not have our municipal traffic position staffed. An analysis of mental health calls continues to show mental health as a factor in approximately 10% of the police calls attended. That's similar to what we've seen in previous years. So not a huge change there. So in terms of most recent trends, we'll just talk a little bit what we've seen so far this year in 2024. We've been pretty busy. We are seeing shoplifting crime on the rise, with a few of our larger retail stores being victims of prolific or repeat offenders who have targeted stores in our community. There has been recent success in identifying some of these offenders through some of our really well done crime analyst work and information sharing that our crime analyst helps us with. We're actually seeing prolific offenders from other communities, Up Island, who are coming to our community to commit some of these offenses. Our major crime section has been busy investigating more serious crime offenses over this past month, in particular the last month. We're seeing we saw a spike and an increase in reported sex assaults. And I just wanted to report, it's probably well known in the community, that on February 3rd, our officers responded to a serious aggravated assault on 5th Street. The victim of that assault has been hospitalized for many weeks. The investigation is progressing, and last week members made an arrest in connection with this investigation. There is not a concern for public safety in relation to this February 3rd incident. So that's, there's some excellent work I've been around a long time. I'm seeing some excellent work done by the officers and our staff, and which I'm pleased to see, and I think overall we're doing a good job of providing policing services to the community. And that kind of concludes my report. If you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer.
Thank you for the update. I'll first turn to Councillor Untitled and Councillor Novick.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Staff Sergeant Conley, for your presentation and the update. With respect to the sort of chronic challenges with staffing, and I know it's not unique to this detachment by any stretch. I've asked the question before, but some time has passed with, and the province has maybe doubled down on Surrey Police Service and its RCMP contract currently there. Do you anticipate as that transition occurs or continues to occur that there may be additional resources available to detachments like this one?
I'd have a better answer if I hadn't got a reply today where I sought the release of a member from Surrey, and the answer was no. They're not releasing that particular member. So I guess that's a pretty good indication of where things are at in Surrey.
So is there, is there a date when you might foresee some of that movement will start to occur?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I honestly don't.
And if I may, you know, please do, and this may not be the forum, but do please communicate with us if there's anything, you know, the town can do to help, you know, elevate any concerns you may have with respect to this matter to the RCMP, because of course, we greatly appreciate the work your detachment does, and we know it can be very stressful to have a lot of overtime in the case of some of your officers, and if we can help raise our voice to look for some more recruitment options for this detachment, I'm sure we would be very delighted to try and pursue that. So thank you again.
Thank you. And I think just an added comment I would have is because these announcements of these promotions and transfers is so new, and we're early in the stages of staffing, it's hard for me to actually know exactly how this will all shake out, but I'm optimistic that we'll get these positions filled, and I'm hoping sooner than later, but sometimes the processes take a while to do, and it may be that some of these positions will end up going to promotion because they were all NCO or supervisor positions that I spoke of that are leaving. So it's a lot of our top, sort of our supervision management level of the detachment we're losing. I'll stick around to see it all shake out good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Novick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Staff Sergeant, for a great report. I looked in maybe a little more detail than normal the crime statistics, and the only one that gave me some concern for the town of Sidney was the increase in the number of break and enters, both commercial, residential, and other. Looking back over a couple of years, the numbers really seem to have jumped in this year. Do you have any insight as to why that might be?
My comment would be that our break and enter levels are very low, and in comparative to other communities, we are seeing a bit of a jump, yes, but the numbers really, in comparison to what I'm aware of in other communities, they're so much lower. So I think we're really fortunate to have, in those areas, not a concerning level of crime. If that answers your question, I mean, I do think that those types of things ebb and flow a little bit. It only takes like one active offender to change the landscape of you know, the number of property crimes you may have. And a case in point would be like the theft vehicle. I believe that our one offender was responsible for many of those theft of cars and changed the whole landscape of stolen vehicles in our community. So, because I think it went from 4 stolen cars and we're talking just in Sidney the year before to 11 this year. So that's 3 times roughly, right? So does that answer your question? Or?
Yeah, kind of. I guess my only concern is that you're not seeing this as the start of a trend.
No, I'm not. No, I don't have concerns there from what I'm seeing.
Great.
Thank you, Councillor
Thank
Novick.
you,
I'll
Mr.
turn to
Mayor.
Councillor Duck, then Councillor Gurnett, then Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Staff Sergeant, and given the recent promotions, kudos to you and your leadership development. Hopefully that'll be a good recruiting tool in bringing new people in, because obviously they develop well under you. A quick question, maybe if I may, Mr. Mayor, through to staff. Do we currently have that fraud brochure on our website, or can we put that fraud brochure on our website? Just because it seems like those 7 tips would be valuable to get out. Thank you.
Through the mayor to Councillor Duck, yes, we do. Yep.
Thank you again, Staff Sergeant. Great work.
You're welcome. I actually have a few. If I may approach, I'll just share them. My hard copies, but we can get electronic copies to the town.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor Gurnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Staff Sergeant Conley, as usual, for your report, and for Constable Cosgrove for being present tonight and taking questions and presenting. It's nice to see another face. I have a couple questions. I think we talked about in our budget the hiring of another constable that was supposed to start April 1st. How does that fit into the mix of everything else that's going on? with your staffing?
Can you repeat that question, please?
I believe, I could be wrong, but I think there was something mentioned in our budget of we approved a hiring of another officer last year that was supposed to start this year. Is that still in the mix?
That position has been confirmed and is actually part of our strength now. So that's been like that position evolved over 2023.
Yeah.
But it's the vacancy management that becomes the challenge. But it will help us in the long run to have, you know, I won't hesitate to tell you that this year, the town of Sidney will pay for 12 officers, yet we're contracted to have 16. So, you know, you can sort of understand that having the number of police officers that we need. Now, fortunately, we have an integrated detachment. We're integrated with North Saanich and we're integrated with provincial resources as well. So collectively together, we're still able to efficiently deliver services.
Great, thank you. And if I may, Mayor, looking at your report under, this is a weird one to me, but under bylaws, I was just curious where it had a jump of 40 to 80 under bylaw other. What would that typically encompass?
I knew I was going to get that question. And I asked my crime analyst to do some work on it, but I didn't get a reply today, so he was busy.
Okay.
Well, I would tell you that I think a lot of the increases in the bylaw calls have to do with typically, you know, working with our bylaw services around parking issues, maybe impeding sidewalk issues, those kind of things that we've seen in the parks and those kind of things. But I'm kind of guessing a little bit.
Can I just help you with that?
Please.
Sorry. I'd just like to say, I think we're working more closely with bylaws than we have in the past. So anytime Cliff has an issue, he's more apt to call us, and when he does call me, I'll generate a bylaw file.
Okay.
So I think a lot of these are proactively generated files that just speak to the relationship we've built with bylaw.
Great. And if I may, one last question. With regards back to the auto theft, because I remember when I first came on council, that was a big push in the stickers in the window, and it was a problem of a larger proportion back in like 2018, 2019, in that range. So you were mentioning one particular individual, and as anybody who follows the news, I know we're not a major city, but auto theft has been a big issue in the news. You don't see that as being an indication of something that might, because they're talking about the potential for Vancouver and the ports there, of something like that impacting our community, and that's not something we should worry about based on these numbers.
I just want to make a distinction. So what you're referring to is what we had previously as a big problem of theft from vehicles.
From vehicles, yeah.
And
yeah.
this is more,
Yeah.
I'm referring to a theft
Yeah.
of vehicles.
Yeah.
But, so just to clarify there.
Yeah.
But what you're referring to in terms of some of the Ontario
Yeah.
stuff and maybe Vancouver, that's not an impact to us at this point. But I will say that a prolific offender who's very good at this can be a problem for communities, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Councillor Keefe.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. The thing that jumped out at me as most concern was that increase in child pornography, 900%, I think. So is that because we're doing more investigations into that sort of thing, that we're being proactive about seeking it out or finding people who are engaged in that sort of thing, or it's just something that's kind of fallen into our laps recently?
You're correct. Like we have at both the national level out of Ottawa and at the provincial level out of Vancouver, we have integrated child exploitation teams. And I don't know the specific nature of their work, but they very much are able to identify cases for us in our different communities. And so they make referrals of cases that we take on. And there's lots of search warrant work that goes along with this as we get IP addresses and go from there.
Okay.
So it's as I alluded to before, it's a lot of work. Like, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But it isn't. Yeah, it's proactive type of policing.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Staff Sergeant Conley, Constable Cosgrove, thank you so much for your presentation, taking questions. But thank you to you and all members of the detachment for your professional policing service, not only in protecting us, but also the great work, community work we're doing and you're doing that engages our community and keeps them informed.
Thank you. And as I mentioned about having backup, so Tim bailed me out on the bylaw question, so I knew that would happen. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too.
We'll turn to our next presentation, and I'm pleased to welcome this evening Central Saanich Councillor Niall Paltiel, who is also Commission Chair of the Saanich, Panorama Recreation Centre and Senior Manager Panorama Recreation, to present to us on the strategic plan.
Thank you very much, Mayor McNeil-Smith. I was nervous that the RCMP were here for me. Oh, there we're on. Okay, perfect. I'll leave that comment off, Mike. Okay, excellent. Good evening, Mayor, Council, members of the public and staff. As well, I want to begin by respectfully acknowledging that we are on the traditional territories of the Saanich people. It's not only where we conduct our municipal business, but it's also where we share and cross-pollinate with respect to recreation, and we continue to recognize, respect, and empower the traditional territory and culture within our many facilities. As mentioned, I am Councillor Niall Paltiel here today as the newly minted chair of the Peninsula Recreation Commission, playing a little hooky from my own council meeting this evening. And I do also just want to thank and acknowledge Mayor McNeil-Smith, who serves as a commissioner, Councillor Garnett, who serves as a commissioner, and Councillor Rintoul, who I had the pleasure of serving on the Rec Commission with in our previous term, as well Miss Frost, who is the Sidney Commission representative as well. With me today is Miss Brewster, the senior manager for the Peninsula Recreation Commission, and really the goal of today is coming in as chair with a fairly new strategic plan and an ambitious strategic plan that looks to both expand recreation amongst our various communities, but also have a real focus on the core principles of providing accessible, sustainable, and financially attainable recreation for our patrons and for folks throughout the community. Being our main focus, we wanted to update you with this plan, provide a chance for you to ask any questions, provide us with any ideas, and if you have any skill testing questions, I always say we'll get you an answer, and if we can't find an answer, we'll make one up. So with that, thank you very much this evening, and I'm going to pass it over to Ms. Brewster.
Thank you very much to the mayor and council. It's a pleasure being here tonight. I've been, I realized today that I've been working in the field for over 40 years. I started as a playground leader at 15 years of age, and I've never looked back. I just love the field. So it's thank you for the opportunity to present the strategic plan 2022-2026. I just wanted to point on the screen just to show you that we have a photo of our Jumpstart multi-sport court, and that was gifted to the commission by the Canadian Tire Jumpstart charities. This is a unique facility. It's the first in British Columbia. There's about 3 others back east. We were very fortunate to receive it in our community. I don't know if you're ever driving by on a weekend or during the week, and it is absolutely full of families and youth playing on it. So it's just an incredible amenity to our recreation facilities. The unique thing about this court, it was designed to be accessible and inclusive. It has many features, such as parasport court lines for basketball. We also have adjustable basketball hoops and nets. And there, if you can see on the photo, it has contrasting colors. And that was designed and working with several groups to support kids with visual impairment. So it's just been a really great facility. We also work with partners for this multi-sport court, One Ability via sport, and we bring lots of sport fundamental programs to the court. And about a year and a half ago, the Commission received an award for this facility through the British Columbia Recreation Parks Association for 2023 Facility Excellence Award for facilities under 1.5 million. So it's been a really great facility for the community. So I have brought copies of the strategic plan, and I will leave them here, and also our annual program service report, which was presented to the Commission last week, and it really basically recaps the outcomes of working through our strategic plan as well as our program services and delivery. For our strategic plan, we went through quite an extensive engagement process with the three communities as well as our nations, and we compiled a lot of data, did a lot of research about recreation trends throughout the province and throughout Canada. The plan actually identifies 13 strategies, 29 actions, and 5 service delivery objectives. And on the, if I could just go back, thank you, to the service delivery objectives. This really helps to guide staff in terms of our programs and services. The first one, inclusive. So really, anything that we do through programs and services, we really have that inclusive lens on our programs. And I want to ensure that all residents, regardless of their ability or identity, have full access to recreation programs and services. And the other piece too is that we really need to make sure that our programs and services are aligned with community need and really address the gaps that are in our communities and really try to develop those programs and services. We also look at quality. We want to ensure that the programs that we put out into the community, that they are striving for that culture of excellence. And we constantly provide feedback and evaluation loops to ensure that we are achieving that goal. And collaborative. I think this is one of the most important pieces for me, is that when you're working with communities, you have to be collaborative in looking at partnerships and sponsorships. As staff, we can't do it all alone. We have to develop those partnerships to help deliver programs and services. And the last one, which I think is really important moving forward, we've seen a lot in terms of our climate is changing. We've looked at our program services under that climate lens, but they also have to be sustainable. So if we're looking at developing programs and services, and we want to make sure that if we're filling that gap and filling that need in the community, that we are able to sustain that. And in terms of the environmental piece, the Commission has fully funded a heat recovery project. And basically, to put it in simple terms, we have a refrigeration plant in our arena, and what we're attempting to do is take the heat that goes off that refrigeration plant and repurpose it throughout our facility to provide heat, as also to provide cooling. So that will really help in terms of moving forward, in terms of those greenhouse gas emissions, and it'll actually reduce it by 466 tons per year. Panorama is one of the largest greenhouse gas basically we're the largest in CRD. And so by doing this, it'll reduce our gases by 45%. So it'll be a huge achievement for the Commission. So moving into accessibility and inclusion, it started back in 2009 when the Commission had the vision for accessibility and inclusion. Panorama opened the first accessible water slide tower with an elevator. And it was the first for North America, which allowed people with mobility challenges to share in the enjoyment of riding down the water slide. And we've never looked back. We've continued with that vision in terms of that accessibility. We continually apply for several grants, funding opportunities through Enabling Accessibility Fund, and that's enabled Panorama to look at our facility to ensure that we have those automatic doors, the grab bars, lower counters, and a lot of other amenities that come with our facility. We've also just opened and completed our new accessible playground at Green Glade Community Center. And we also really, for years now, have been an active participant in recognizing and taking part in the National Accessibility Week. And we host a lot of activities. We provide a very strong social media campaign to really feature some of our participants that actually recreate in our facility with that accessibility piece. We also have a program called LIFE. It's a regional program throughout the Greater Victoria, and that reduces the financial barriers for low-income families. We're able to offer recreation opportunities for a lower cost. And we do have a funding agreement with the Island Health to provide inclusion support, which is really, really important for our spring break programs for children and youth, as well as our summer programs. And we're finding quite an increase on the demand as we continue to go forward with those programs. There's just more and more families that need and require that support. And lastly, in terms of our accessibility and inclusion, I'll kind of segue into our strategic infrastructure. Currently, our arena change rooms are extremely old, probably about 40 years old, and they're not really meeting our current accessibility or inclusion standards. So moving forward with our strategic plan, we have several strategies looking at our infrastructure, and of course what I just mentioned was the arena. We have seen a huge increase in girls' participation in hockey through the Capital Region Female Minor Hockey Association. In fact, it increased 125% on the peninsula since 2020 and 2021 compared to 70% in the Greater Victoria area. So that's a really big push in terms of looking at accessibility and revising those change rooms. It's really important that our change rooms are accessible and inclusive to the wide range of participants. Well, as we will be looking at the arena, we'll be looking at also our food services. The arena goes day and night, early mornings. A lot of families, pretty much live at our facility. So it's really important, we found when we went through the engagement process with the strategic plan, is that, some type of food services was really important, and they saw a need for that. So when we get into the whole piece around the concept drawings, we'll look at what that looks like for our renovation. And the other piece that's really exciting is that when we went through our strategic plan, and even back when we did a needs assessment back with our old strategic plan, there was a real need for a multi-sport facility in the community. And Central Saanich identified this piece, and also was able to get grant funding of $2 million to build this facility that would actually replace the 40-year-old lacrosse box in Centennial Park. And so the commission, that project has turned over to the commission. We will start building that project this summer. It will be completed in 2025. And it's going to be multi-sport facility that will have an opportunity to have many sport activities, pickleball, lacrosse, lots of drop-in sports. It will be 22,000 square feet with a steel roof, which will be great. So it'll be covered all year round, and also asphalt plain surface, dasher boards, and it'll be open aired. So we're quite excited about that opportunity. That will be a really great amenity for the community. The other piece that came forward in our strategic plan was for the staff and commission to take that leadership role in pickleball. And we're working with the 3 municipalities, and we'll be conducting a needs assessment this spring to really look at recreation programs and services in the 3 communities. And pickleball will be one of those pieces that we'll be looking at and engaging with our stakeholders to have those discussions. The last piece is around the pool. When we were going through Panorama was going through the COVID, we were able to keep our pool open, and it was just a booming success. And through our strategic plan, we really heard loud and clear how important the pool facility is for the community, not only for our older adults that are there at 6 o'clock every morning to participate, but also for families and for children learning how to swim. And we're just kind of at that point where, you know, in the pool, we're starting to collect the data, starting to look at usage so that we can prepare and the commission can prepare for maybe future expansion in future years. So this will be the time in the next 5 years to really collect data and to really look at that piece. And just moving down the program and service delivery focus, you know, we have done lots of good work with our nations. We continue to do the work, and they do participate at Panorama through our programs. And we're continuing to work with them with ongoing dialogue to really develop those programs and services, and to really also ensure that with any future programs that we're able to work with them and encourage them to participate. And to continue on with our youth programming, we look at the physical literacy. So that's a lot of our programs on the multi-sport court. We continue to do that as well. Recruitment is another strategy that we're working on in terms of staff training and ensuring that our staff levels remain high so that we can continue to provide the programs and services, as well as I touched upon inclusion. We always look at that piece and ensure that whatever we develop, whatever we deliver, that it has that accessibility and inclusion piece on it. When we were going through COVID, a lot of people, of course, went online. We drove a lot of people onto our website, and so we continually collect the data to ensure that when we're developing programs and making decisions that we have the facts to do that. And then, as I mentioned at our last commission meeting, we're continually reporting out to our commission and showing the outcomes of our strategic plan as well as of our programs and services. Just the last piece, the budget has gone forward and was developed and approved by our commission. The 2024-2028 total capital plan is $15.9 million. and 10.6 million is for infrastructure and service enhancement projects. And that includes the Centennial Multi-Sport Box, our climate action piece to reduce GHG emissions, that's our heat recovery, and our all of our infrastructure strategic areas like the arena and dressing room facilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lorraine Brewster. We certainly appreciate the presentation and the good work the Commission and staff are doing. Council, I want to be mindful that we do still have a majority of our agenda to complete, and I'm sure we would have some interesting questions on the centre, but if there's any questions you'd like to direct to Ms. Brewster now, please go ahead. Councillor O'Keefe.
I think I just want to comment. Just want to applaud Panorama for the leadership role that they're taking in terms of accessibility in our region, and all the things you mentioned about the multi-court, the water slide, the green glade playground. Also, really appreciate your presence on our Saanich Peninsula Accessibility Advisory Committee, and you guys Panorama is further along in the journey, I think, than many of us. You mentioned starting back in 2008 or 9. So your willingness to share your lessons in terms of accessible playgrounds and spaces, and that's very much appreciated. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Seeing no other further questions, I want to thank Commission Chair Paltiel for your leadership at the Commission table and taking on that role this term, and thank you, Lorraine Brewster. Just one question, 2 parts. Roughly how many patrons visit Panorama Recreation in the different facilities, and how many staff and volunteers do we have?
Roughly. Yeah, so just approximately for staff, and of course you can appreciate that we have a lot of what we call auxiliary staff. So, but our total amount of staff is around 250 employees. And that's seasonal auxiliaries, that's like a fitness instructor coming to instruct a fitness class for 2 hours or 1 hour. Our drop-ins range between 950 to 1,000 participants per day. Yeah.
So I just wanted to thank you and the entire team for the beehive that you operate at Panorama. Anybody who gets close knows how busy and how wide-ranging the programs and facilities are there. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome to stay, but maybe you'll finish your hooky part. We'll next turn to number 5, which is bylaws. We have one this evening. It's bylaw number 2265, the Animal License and Control Amendment number 2 to permit the keeping of backyard hens. We do have 2 written submissions. We have had this business go through several previous council meetings, and we do have a recommendation. Councillor Duck.
I would move that the recommendation that the bylaw be adopted.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. I'll turn to the mover and seconder.
Nothing to add previous conversations.
Yeah, no, I think we've had fairly robust discussions on this, so nothing to add.
I would agree we have, but I'll turn to if there's any further discussion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Nova, Councillor O'Toole, Councillor Garnett. The motion carries. Thank you. We're next turning to section 6, and we have 2 development permits and variance permits to consider this evening. The first, under 6A, is development variance permit application number DV 100351 at 2306 Grove Crescent. It's to change the minimum rear setback to construct a 2-story family dwelling. And we have a presentation this evening from Mr. Ryan Hoyt. I would invite you to connect Mr. Hoyt, and you will have the floor to present.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you for having me. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, you bet.
Thank you. So we are here to review a proposed duplex, 2306 Grove Crescent. In reading through the staff report, I think they did an excellent job in capturing the essence of our application and really summarizing the key points. So I'm not going to take a ton of time tonight, but I'd just like to touch on some of those key points. This property is at the end of a cul-de-sac with frontage on Grove Crescent and also frontage on Calvin Avenue in the rear. Because of the dual frontage, the front yard is the shorter of those lot lines, so Grove is the front and Calvin is the rear in this case. But the design for the duplex that we have essentially splits the frontage and puts the front of one unit to face Calvin Avenue and the front of another unit to face Grove. So in doing so, it sort of gives each unit a bit of its own street presence and a little bit of its own sense of belonging to a street. And it also allows for a bit of a dual outdoor usability space with, you know, some front yard and some rear yard that are somewhat private to your own unit. So what we're seeking is a relaxation of the rear setback, which in this case is the frontage off of Calvin Avenue. I'm just going to turn to this landscape plan that shows a little bit better the relationship of the two units, which are the white outlines here. So we have one driveway obviously facing Grove and one driveway facing Calvin Avenue. So if you're building a single family home on this lot, you would have a 7.5 meter setback off the front and the same off the rear. When it's in a duplex, the rear yard setback requirement is increased quite a bit, and it becomes a 33% of the lot depth. So this lot is a bit of what we call an irregular lot shape. So it's a bit of a pie shape because it sits in a cul-de-sac, and just because of that relationship has not sort of a conventional rectangular shape where it's much deeper than it is wide. So obviously the impacts of a rear yard setback that are a percentage of lot depth are quite consuming or quite punitive in this case. So you see here, this one red line is the required setback in the zone, and the second is what we are seeking. So overall, the density, meaning the overall lot coverage, is within the allowances. It's within the 30% allowable. We're simply seeking a little bit more depth to take and utilize a little bit more of the property to fit duplex units that are big enough to have 3 bedrooms on the upper level, are big enough to have a garage and a decent amount of living space, but within the lot coverage and the overall density allowances. So I think in summary, really, the key points are the reason in the duplex zoning that the prescribed setbacks are greater in the rear yard are just being mindful that outdoor living space is important and it should be important. And in this case, I think because we've split the front and the backs so that they are independent, you can see each property does have a good amount of front and rear yard in each case. So by seeking this relaxation, we're really not losing out or really not missing an opportunity to provide a decent amount of outdoor space, but overall, we're able to provide some units that are a decent size. So I'll just show briefly, the design has been done to make it look like from both front and back that it is the front of a building, and it almost has the resemblance of a single family dwelling in some respects. So they're not sort of ignoring that there is presence and appearance from 2 streets. However, one is the front side and one is the back side for the other. I'm just gonna fan forward. So these are the unit layouts. They're basically the inverse of each other. So we have a single car garage, a mudroom, kitchen, dining, living room, some storage and a mechanical room, and a 2-piece bathroom on the main floor. It's about 850 square feet of living space. Upstairs, we have 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms and a laundry room. So the units overall are just under 1,950 square feet with a 252 square foot garage for a total of about 2,200 square feet per side. So really good size units that would suit a young family really well. And just that little bit of extra, little bit extra lot depth allows us to kind of fit this footprint within that somewhat irregular lot shape. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Hoyt. Before going to possible questions from council, we do have, after presentations such as these and applications, an opportunity for the public to ask any questions or make comments. We call it a special public participation period, so I'll ask for a first-time if there's anyone wishing to come forward to speak to this application. I'll call for a second time, and seeing none, we will conclude that aspect, and I'll now turn to council members if you have questions of the applicant. After questions of the applicant, we can go to the staff report and questions of staff. I'll begin with Councillor Gannett.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Hoyt, for your presentation. I just have one question, because I couldn't tell from any of the paperwork attached whether or not there's a plan to put heat pumps into these structures.
Yes, there will.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further questions, thank you, Mr. Hoyt, for your presentation. We'll now close off the presentation, and we'll go to the staff report and council discussion. I'll turn to staff. Is there anything you're wishing to add on this application?
Thank you. Good evening. No, nothing further on this one. It's quite a straightforward setback request to reduce that rear setback. Thank you. Thank you,
Ms. Verhagen. I'll turn to council if there are any questions. If not, we do have a motion, a recommendation. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you. I'll move the recommendation that owners and tenants in occupation of property within 75 meters of 2306 Grove Crescent be notified regarding development variance permit application number DV100351 to relax the rear setback requirement from 9.85 meters to 7.5 meters in order to allow for the construction of a two-family dwelling on the subject property, and that any written correspondence be forwarded to council at the time of consideration of approval of the variance.
Second.
We haven't moved in second. I'll turn to the movers.
No, thank you.
Any further discussion? Councillor Gannett.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a comment, having gone to the site from both perspectives, Grove and Calvin, appreciate the lot is unique for sure, and the creativity that you've used to put these on the site the way you did. I think, having looked at it from both sides now, sort of thing, from both streets, it makes sense, and I agree with staff and what your letter of rationale. It's really like having two front yards. Kind of the rear yard kind of is not really part of the equation when you take it from that perspective. And I just want to compliment you on the fact that this isn't like an average size home, but you've allowed for storage on both floors, which is something that's lost in a lot of developments. And then the garage becomes de facto the storage part. So this will hopefully allow the car to park in the garage, and if there's a second car in the driveway, and then potentially eliminate cars from the street. So I appreciate that aspect. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Gannett. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hoyt.
Thank you very much.
We'll now turn to item 6B, which is Development Variance Permit Application number DV100352 at 10214 Resthaven Drive to increase minimum building height, number of stories, and lot coverage to construct a two-family dwelling. And I'm pleased to welcome Sylvie Bonnet from Finlayson and Bonnet Architecture to present. Good evening.
Good evening, sorry. So thank you, Mayor and Council, for listening to this presentation. And I'm going to be quite short, and brief, because there's an excellent report, explaining the whole thing, just adding a couple of things. The property is already zoned, for the duplex, and so that's what we're doing. And considering the setbacks at the front and at the back, so the footprint of the house, are kind of limited. And so to have the garage and the 3 stories, or the 2.5 stories that we could have had without the FCL, we would have gone deeper into the ground for another foot. So given the FCL that we have to take into consideration, so the elevation at the ground floor is in the 415. So that implies basic. So very good. We can go to the next one. Sorry. 2. Sorry. So we can see here in the elevations, and what happens is that by moving the ground floor to the 415, not being able to go a foot deeper, the relationship between the 1.2 meters that we have to the underside of the second floor, it becomes 1.5. And so on the overall height of the house now is an extra foot. So that item really had a repercussion in the whole layout of the units. As you can see, when we look at where the average grade is, and where the garage is, it's actually quite deep. And also wanted to note that the height variance that we are requesting is actually, again, so it's pointed out also in the report, the flat areas of the roof are within the bylaws. Is the sloped roof that is beyond, again, by a foot or so over the maximum height, but also the idea of having the sloped roof allows for future solar panels that would be because they're facing mostly south. So it's an aesthetic reason, but mostly, I mean, for the future to do something that would be actually environmentally friendly. So those, the other variance that we are applying for is related to the lot coverage. And yes, you can go, sorry. And the lot coverage, yeah, we can see in this view, and my apologies, I think it's, oh, no. In this view where that dotted line is, that is indicating the average grade, is that lower floor, because now is not really it's now considered the main floor. Not a basement, is the main floor. And by being the main floor, so now it has to be, can be 35%, but the actual most important part of the house, the living area, that it will be the middle floor, is now over the lot coverage. So those are all the variances are basically related to the same reason, and is where the FCL is located, or where it's placed, and how to move the house, I mean, so to comply with that element. So, thank you. If there are any questions, happy to answer.
Thank you for the presentation. Before we go to questions, we do have a special public participation period as well. And so I'll, for a first-time call, if there's any members of the public who wish to ask any questions or make any comments. I'll call for a second time, and seeing none, I will turn to colleagues. Councillor Duck.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Bonet, for that presentation. And just to help people in the audience who are watching this and in the audience here, FCL's flood construction level, and that's dictated by the town as to what level people can build to depth of. So I appreciate what you're having to do is to adjust to that to build up, and hence the additional height requested to just put the building in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I have 3 questions. Thank you, Ms. Bonet, for your presentation. And I'll ask the same question because it was a little difficult to read some of the parts of the agenda that I got. So the same question I asked to the previous presenter, will there be heat pumps installed?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. Second question, when I looked at the actual designs as I pulled them apart, was there any consideration given to secondary suites? Or is this simply going to be a single family home?
For the time being, it's a single family home. If there is a change in the bylaws, there could be a consideration, but so far it's no.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And I guess the last question I would ask is that given the size of the homes, and they're both, by my estimation, quite large, 3,500 square feet and just over 3,800 square feet, was there any thought given, would there have been a different way to design the home so that you wouldn't have needed to ask for variances by scaling back the square footage at some degree?
No, the main problem was with the flood control level and having the garage. So by placing the garage in, well, the only place where we could have it, so that reduces the footprint. So, and we wanted to have a main bedroom on the main floor, so with living areas in that area. So, and if you notice, one of the units has an elevator. Yes. So it's considered for the future. This is for the family. So this is a father living on one of the units, and the son that is actually here, I mean, living in the other unit. So thinking that when the parents get at a stage in which they would have mobility issues, they can actually live and use the elevator. And that was part of it, rather than going to the 3 stories. Well, the only access point would be at the lower level, obviously, and then having the possibility to live just on the main floor. I mean, that's the main part of the dwelling.
Thank you. That's it for me. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. So I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Councillor Garnett made me think of something when he mentioned the secondary suites. So is that something that you would be interested in doing if, or is that something that you might put in the wiring or whatever is required for that in the future?
It could be done for more than the wiring, having fire separations. I mean, for the future. So that I think it would be a good idea. And when that becomes a bylaw, if it does become a bylaw, so then going back and retrofitting will not be that difficult. I think that this is the time, and for sure we can build for that. Because I think in the future things are going probably to change somehow, but whether it happens this year or only in 5 years, we don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you, Chair. And forgive me, again, the diagrams are a little light, and the font is very small, but just to confirm, this raises all of the habitable living space, including the garage space, above FCL.
Yes. Yes.
And when you refer to the elevator, then any mechanical, nothing is going to be below that lowest point. So
those are residential elevators. So they have an elevator pit that is only 6 inches. So that they're really minor, and there is no mechanics in that space, so it's not an issue.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Seeing no further questions, I just have one, and from the letter of rationale, it says that the lot coverage on the first story will be 33%.
Yeah.
And you're seeking the variance on the second and the third level to 35%.
It's no, it should be the 33%. Sorry. It's this third floor. The lower floor is 33%. The second floor is exactly the same footprint.
It's 33.
It's the same.
All
it's the
three
same.
floors are 33%.
The top floor, no, the top floor is 30%.
It's 30%. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation and taking our questions. I will again turn to Ms. Verhagen if there's anything you wish to add on this application.
Thank you. Yes, this is, as was pointed out, what the variances are for, just to increase height, number of stories, and lot coverage because of the recommendations from the professional engineer in that flood hazard report that assesses the flood hazard on this property and recommends a minimum floor elevation. So that's what staff receive and review when we're reviewing an application like this. Also, if I could just speak to the issue of suites and duplexes. As was noted, that's not currently permitted by the town's zoning bylaw, but it is one of the changes that will be coming in the zoning bylaw updates, which will be done by the end of June because of the provincial legislation allowing up to 4 units in the R2 zone. So down the road, that may be a possibility on this property, but currently it is not. So we couldn't issue a permit for that right now. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarity. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Just a question through just that, on that point. So although we haven't gone and changed our zoning bylaw yet, if an applicant were to come forward wanting to do that, and because it's in the provincial legislation, what do the rules say about that in terms of, are we required to allow that even though the zoning bylaw isn't done?
Yeah, through the mayor, no, we're not required to do that before June 30th of this year.
Okay.
So somebody could submit an application, but we can't do anything with it until it's permitted by our bylaws.
Okay.
So as Mr. Newcomb had indicated previously to council, that will be done by the end of June of this year.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. And if I could look for a mover of the recommendation.
And I so move the recommendation that owners and tenants in occupation of the property within 75 meters, 246 feet of 10214 Resthaven Drive be notified regarding development variance permit application number DB 100352 to increase the maximum permitted building height, lot coverage, and number of stories in order to allow a new two-family dwelling. Be notified regarding the proposed variance, and that any written correspondence received be forwarded to council at the time of consideration of the approval of the variance.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call Councillor Gurnett.
Sorry, thank you, Mayor. I thought you were going to go to them first.
Go ahead.
I just want to comment that I will support this. The reason I asked the question about suites and the answer was provided by staff is I wanted to trigger into the fact that that is going to be something that the government is leaning towards. And this would have been a prime example of a place that could have done that, accommodated that with suites on both sides. In fact, when I looked through the drawings and the diagrams, and I looked at the basement floor plan, I'm like, this place just screams for a suite. I mean, it's just like perfect for it. but we can't do it yet. And I think this is for people, I think staff wants to speak.
Sure, just to follow up on my previous comment, I'd said before that we can issue a permit if somebody applied for one because it's not permitted by our bylaws. But if somebody applied for a rezoning to
Right.
get this done before we plan to do it by the end of June, then we can't stop that because the legislation does support that. So,
Right, okay, sorry, midstream of thought. And just, you know, I think this is one of the reasons why the provincial government's kind of weighing in on single-family developments for this particular reason. And hopefully, down the road, this place will be able to be suited and add some much-needed housing to our community. But in the end, this is, you know, a proposal that fits what's allowed other than the variances. And given our flood construction level and the requirement for it, there really isn't much else they can do. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Bonet. We're now turning to number 7. We have 2 sets of minutes to adopt, those from our regular council meeting of February the 12th and those from our special council meeting to go in camera of February 15th. If I could have a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
For both.
Moved and seconded. Any errors, omissions, or corrections? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And we're next turning to number 9, Rise and Report. We have on the agenda Rise and Report from a special council in camera meeting of February 15th. At that meeting, council resolved to raise our strategic 2022 to 2026 strategic plan. That was raised and presented at the Committee of the Whole last week on February the 20th, and so we are just noting it as a formality in our minutes at this council meeting. We'll now turn to council reports. We have one this evening. I'll turn to Councillor Novick with a verbal update from Vancouver Island Regional Library and the Saanich Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. Councillor Novick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and colleagues. I'll try and be brief as I can with this. The Virl AGM was held on February 10th of this year. A new executive was nominated. There were exactly the number of nominations as was needed, and so there were no elections. Everyone was acclaimed. The chair, Aaron Hemmons from Nanaimo, and vice chair, Fred Robertson, Port Hardy. Positions remained as per last year. The meeting was quickly adjourned and followed by a regular Board of Trustee meetings where new digital library collection was presented as well as a new collection for children. There will be a revised meeting schedule this year. There will be 1 board meeting each quarter, 5 executive meetings throughout the year, and 3 audit and finance committee meetings, which is a new committee this year, and this audit and finance committee will be selected probably at the first executive meeting. Finance report was presented, and the library is showing a healthier financial position at the end of 2023 than the previous year. The new Masset Library is underway. Design work is 80% complete, and groundbreaking is scheduled to be sometime in the early spring. And that's pretty much it for Virl. If there are any questions, or I can wait till after both.
I'll just turn now if there's any questions. Thank you for the report. Please continue.
Thank you. And a very brief report on Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. There are apparently 40 business awards to be presented in February. I'm not exactly sure what date. They may already have been presented because I was told it would be done in the middle of the month. There is planned to be a tour of local industry, a bus tour of local industry in April or May. More details will be coming shortly. And the Chamber is working on an ongoing membership drive to try and get numbers back up to the peak of 500 in 2017. I think they're down into the low 300s or high 200s at this point. There was quite a bit of attrition during the COVID period. Top 3 chamber issues are housing, staffing, and transit. No surprises there. There will be a new meeting format for the 3 council liaisons of Central Saanich, North Saanich, and Sidney, and that is to meet every 2 months with the executive director to get chamber updates rather than attending council meetings as in the past. There were some issues there which have been discussed previously, and this is a solution that seems to be agreeable to the 3 council liaisons to continue to get updates from the chamber. And that's all I have to report. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any questions, Councillor Duck?
Yeah, to your last point, Councillor Novak, I'm a little confused. Does that allow for any dialogue from you hearing from any of the other members on the board of directors from the council or from the Chamber of Commerce board, or is it just between you and the executive director?
That's pretty much the case. The chamber board has pretty much decided that they don't want council liaisons at their meetings. They did allow them to come to meetings previously, but the format for that was quite simple. Council liaisons presented a report from their municipality before the board meeting actually started, or at least as the first item on the agenda. And once those reports were transmitted, the council liaisons were asked to leave. And then they carried on their meetings without council liaison. This was something that I personally found very difficult, and I've pretty much been the one to push hard to make some changes to this. And there's been a lot of dialogue between the executive director and their board, their chair. There's also been some dialogue between the board executive and the mayors of the 3 municipalities. And this new meeting format appears to be the solution. I'll put that in air quotes. I'm not really sure that it solves any great problems, but it does allow a two-way flow of information through the intermediary of the executive director. I hope that helps.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. And seeing no further questions, thank you for the updates from both liaison roles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
We're now turning to...
Point of order?
Yes?
Can I suggest we take a 5-minute recess, please?
Yes, we will recess for 5. Okay, we'll look to reconvene at 7:38, and we were at going on to item 12, and item 12A is the Sidney North Saanich Joint Liaison Committee, and we have the minutes from their meeting of February 15th, which we're receiving onto our agenda. I would turn to members of council. Before going to the recommendation, I'll turn to members of council if there are any questions with regards to those minutes. Seeing none, I'll turn to Councillor Duck, one of our liaisons to that committee, to read the recommendation.
Yes, and I so move that the municipalities absorb the watering costs going forward for Rotary Park based on comparison with other municipalities.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so we attended this meeting, and so did staff from the town relative to the just ever-increasing costs that the Softball Association is facing, and at the same time trying to rebuild from COVID their attendance, and this is a challenge to them. Last year was a huge hit because of the drought, and what we sought out and staff followed up with is they'd researched all the other municipalities in the Capital Regional District, and to this point we're the only one that actually charges the nonprofit society for their watering costs. So it seemed appropriate that we should be able to absorb this. Staff, obviously this was after budget submissions, and staff willingly said they'll work this within the existing budget and build in future costs as they grow for those watering costs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. Councillor Burnett?
If it's allowable, Mayor, I think it'd be really great if Mr. Robinson from staff could weigh in just to provide some context for the other members on council.
Certainly. Mr. Robinson.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, to council, staff are in the process of preparing a staff report right now. As Councillor Duck suggested, we have reached out to 4 major municipalities that do provide playing fields for youth sports, and all of them absorb their operating, irrigation, and maintenance budgets for playing fields. That would be Victoria, Saanich, Central Saanich, and West Shore Parks and Recs. We are going to reach out to a few more to just confirm those numbers. But the idea was staff would provide this information and then perhaps come forward with a recommendation to amend the license to use agreement with PBSA and the 2 municipalities. That way we could have a staff report that we could send out to both municipalities to have debate on and see whether or not it's acceptable at that point. Thank you.
Thank you. And while we've had that introduction, I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions for Mr. Robinson. Councillor Keefe?
Not necessarily well, maybe it is through staff. I'm just wondering about process. So based on the comments Mr. Robinson made about a staff report coming forward, are we better than to refer this to staff for report to come back, and then at that time they would recommend the changes to the agreement? I'm just wondering about the best route to go.
My understanding is that this is a recommendation that's come from the committee for Sidney and the town of Sidney and District of North Saanich. 2, while they are paying for some of the water costs, water costs have risen, so it's to now cover the increased water costs. Staff have indicated that it would fit in this year's budget, but by passing that motion, staff can then prepare a report to come back with amendments to the agreement and any other recommendations. I'll turn to Mr. Humble.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to indicate that
Okay.
through this resolution, we would, and based on North Saanich Council moving the same motion, that staff would come back with the amendment to the license to use agreement for council's consideration.
So I'll turn to Mr. Hissick, and then I have a question. Mr. Hissick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The draft staff report is likely to propose a compromise where the municipalities subsidize the outside water use, but PBSA remains responsible for the building itself.
Thank you for that clarity. My question is, would it just be normal process with this motion? Would staff just forward a copy of our resolution this evening to North Saanich, or should we amend this resolution to include forwarding it to District of North Saanich Council?
We would do that already.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Councillor Keefe, you have the floor.
No, that's fine.
Very good, thank you. I'll turn to Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you, Mayor. And in light of Mr. Hissick's comments then, I take it there's currently, through the mayor to staff, 2 meters, one for the interior use, and that the irrigation meter then is not paying discharge on top of water use. Is that correct?
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Rintoul, yes, that's exactly the way it is right now. I'll flesh all that out so you have a bit of history within the staff report, so that it'll be fairly clear and concise as what's taken place over the last few years to separate out the irrigation costs from the operations of the facility building proponent.
Thank you. And last question, if I may. It's not noted in the minutes, but in terms of the irrigation cost, I guess, for their 2023 operating year, do we know what the cost of water was that they paid for irrigation?
I'll turn to the staff. Mr. Hissick?
I'm sorry, I don't have the breakdown for irrigation versus building, but there was a fairly high cost last year to PBSA of over 10,000, but the year before it was under 1,000, so it does vary.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn back to Councillor Duck, our liaison, to move the recommendation. Oh, I'm sorry. It is moved and seconded. Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, staff. We're now turning to item 12B, which is Committee of the Whole meeting from February 20th. And we are receiving the minutes on our agenda this evening, and I will turn to Councillor O'Toole, chair of that Committee of the Whole meeting, to read in the recommendations.
Thank you, Mayor, and Committee of the Whole recommends and also move that recommendation item 2 under Community Planning and Housing be amended as follows. Bullet 2, update the official community plan to align with the new provincial housing legislation. Status 2024 quarter 3, completion 2025 quarter 4.
We have it moved. A seconder?
Second.
Seconder, any discussion? I'll call a question. All in favor? The motion carries.
Committee of the Whole recommends, and I so move, that a new item 3 be added under Community Planning and Housing as follows. Bullet 3, update the housing needs assessment to align with the new provincial housing legislation. Status 2024 quarter 2, completion 2024 quarter 4.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? The motion carries.
And finally, Committee of the Whole recommends, and I so move, that the draft strategic plan as amended go out for public feedback and be brought back to Council on March the 11th, 2024.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, I do want to speak to Mr. Gelinas, who spoke this evening at public participation with regards to not having a slide projection during the presentation of the strat plan at our meeting last week. That was an oversight on our part, and I accept that we could have done better. We do try to make regular use of our screens, both for members of the public and for council, and I apologize that we didn't do then, and we will have certainly made note of it going forward for the future. We do look forward to the input that we received tonight on various aspects of the plan, and looking forward for members of the public and organizations before March the 11th, when we consider the plan future. And with that, I'll call a question. All in favor? That carries unanimous. Thank you. And I just want to note that the Committee of the Whole's recommendations on the 2024-2028 financial plan will be brought forward to the Special Council budget meeting on Tuesday, March the 5th, a week tomorrow night. That concludes that item. I'm now turning to staff reports. Under 13A, we have a grant application under the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund for the Emergency Operations Center. I'll turn to Mr. Humble for an introduction, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this report addresses a proposed grant application from the fire department in response to the Union of BC Municipalities Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. The grant funding is basically up to $30,000 that, if successful, would be utilized to fund Emergency Operations Center training. It would also build on collaboration between the town's emergency program and the emergency program of local First Nations, as well as procuring additional equipment for the Emergency Operations Center to enhance operational readiness. The grant application requires a resolution from council in support of the application.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. Are there any questions from colleagues? If not, I'll turn to Councillor Keefe.
Yeah, thank you. Through you to staff. I was wondering whether there might be opportunity to include some individuals in the training that, in terms of accessibility, whether that's, I don't know if that's applicable to what they're planning or not. So I guess I know that there is an item, I don't know if it's in our strategic plan or in one of our action items about incorporating accessibility into emergency planning. So I was wondering if that was something that would fit here or might be considered.
Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe. Yeah, unfortunately, Chief Mickelson's not here this evening. He's the one that could potentially speak to the potential opportunity for that. So I'll pass it along and ask him to get back to you on that.
Or I don't necessarily need a response. I'll just provide it as a possible suggestion for his consideration. Thanks.
Thank you. And Councillor Novick.
I'm happy to move the recommendation if there's
Please,
no
go
other
ahead.
questions. Staff report recommends, and I so move, that council support, number one, that council support a $30,000 application for the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, Emergency Operations Center equipment, and training stream, and authorize the fire chief and deputy fire chief to execute any agreements related to a successful grant application, and that any costs above the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund be covered out of the 2024 Town of Sidney Emergency Management Budget.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Thank you to staff for bringing that grant application forward. We're turning to item 13B, which is the Lochside Watermain Contract Award. Turn to staff for an introduction, please. Good evening, Ms. Clary.
Good evening. This report is being brought forward tonight because of the discussions around budget that occurred last week. This project has been in the works for a couple of years. Originally, the intent was to split it over 2 years because of the large dollar value of the project. However, we did tender it late in 2023, and we got pricing for a trenchless replacement of the water main. This is along Lochside Drive, so having an open cut project would not only have impacts on traffic, but there are archaeological sensitive areas in that region. So there's many benefits to doing this project as a trenchless project rather than a full open cut. So the project did come in at a higher price than we were expecting. So we did present that in the 2024 with draft budget. If council is comfortable approving the budget as proposed, which was presented last Monday night, we'd like to move forward and award this contract now to PW Trenchless. The value is over $1.5 million, and that is to do the whole project. There's archaeological and design costs on top of that to make up the project difference. The reason we're bringing it forward is because PW Trenchless actually has time-sensitive work scheduled for the summer months. So if we're unable to complete it before the summer, they would have to leave the project and come back in the fall to complete it. So the more time we give them, the more project float they'll have in their schedule. I'm here to answer any questions if you have any.
Thanks, Ms. Clary. I'll turn to colleagues. Councillor Rintoul and Councillor Novick.
Thank you, Mayor. So, sorry if maybe it's just partly interesting, but the trenchless mechanism, I guess, of this construction has accounted for perhaps the low number of bidders in response. And if you could educate at least me on trenchless versus the open trench from the perspective of the current water main, the water line that's there, and how it is decommissioned, and the timing in relation to the new material.
Through to Councillor Rintoul, the water mains in this area are looped. So this new replacement water main will replace an existing AC water main, which is on the other side of the road as well. So that will remain in service until the new water main is in place. I'm not familiar with all of the specifics of the project, but yeah, the water will stay in service as much as possible through the work.
Does that imply then, if I may, that the old line just becomes redundant at a point and is abandoned and not removed?
Yes, this particular AC main has had a history of breaks. It runs in front of the Cedarwood. I'm not sure if you remember a couple of years ago there was a break in this, so that will become redundant and be abandoned. The smaller asbestos cement water main on the west side of the road.
Thank you. And finally, PW trenchless in terms of their references. Have they worked on the island? Do they regularly work on the island?
We have worked with them in the past, and they have. I'm aware they've worked in other municipalities on the island as well. It is a small industry, but they do good work. We've been happy with the work we've seen with them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Novak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Like my colleague, I am completely ignorant of the techniques involved in trenchless water main digging, because I assume they still end up underground. Could you provide a little bit of color commentary on exactly what trenchless means?
Sure, through to Councillor Novak. So this project is a pipe bursting project, so we needed to keep the diameter of the water main the same as the existing diameter. So we couldn't, there are trenchless projects where you reline an existing main. That's done in other locations, but this project, we actually had to do a pipe bursting because the amount of water demand on this main is the same size as the existing main. The existing main is brittle though, so what they do is they dig two holes, an entry pit and an exit pit, and they take a more flexible pipe material and they actually push it through and they burst the existing pipe. So the existing pipe is like a more brittle material, so it will just expand, and this new pipe will take the space that the old pipe was in. If it was a traditional open cut technology, they would be excavating the whole road and building a new water main either beside, or sometimes they replace in place, but more likely they pick a different alignment if it's an open cut project. However, because of the archaeological sensitivities in the area, the risk is higher, and it's also less desired to dig where there could potentially be archaeological materials. So that is why we went with a trenchless, because there's less excavation required than a full open cut project.
And does that mean that the historical water main that has been burst, the remnants of that remain underground, adjacent to the new pipe? And is there not a risk of those chunks of metal or whatever perforating the new pipe at some point?
So the new pipe material is a strong, flexible, it's more seismic resistant than the existing main. The existing main is what it's called a permastrand material, so they're brittle and they will just kind of break open. So no, there's not a risk of the existing material, I guess, putting a hole in the new material, because the new material is a lot stronger.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett and Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff, so abandoning this permastrand material and leaving it in the ground, it's a fiberglass product that will potentially break down over time. Are there any potential environmentally negative consequences from leaving it there that we know of?
Through to Councillor Garnett, I'm not aware of any. It does currently hold potable water, so I mean, it's not like it's a leaching material that we would worry about it contaminating water. So, I mean, if you are to dig up the water main in the future, there would be additional garbage, I guess, in the ground. However, the intention is not to dig up this area. That is why we're doing a trenchless replacement instead of an open cut.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. Through you to staff, you mentioned that this water main is in front of the cedar wood, or runs, and I guess if so, I'm wondering, knowing that they're under a tight timeline to get this done, and based on what we know the timeline for cedarwood, is there any possible conflicts there in terms of the work getting done for either of them?
Through to Councillor O'Keefe, so sorry that the water main we will be abandoning is a smaller asbestos cement main in front of the cedarwood on the west side of the road.
Okay.
This water main is actually more on the east side of the road. It's a larger diameter, more transmission water main. So we would have to work with them as far as timing of connections go, but I don't expect there to be any significant issues.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. So we do have a recommendation. Councillor Duck?
And I so move the recommendation that the Lochside water main construction contract be awarded to PW Trenchless.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And we're turning, item 13C is the monthly building report for January 2024. It is on the agenda for information. We don't need a resolution. Are there any questions for staff? Seeing none, we'll move on to our next item, which is the first item of correspondence under 14A, a request for funding regarding job fairs by email from Beacon Community Services, and we have a recommendation. Councillor Keefe?
I'll move the recommendation that we refer this to 2024 budget deliberations.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? That motion carries. Thank you. And the second item is the item, the correspondence, 6 pieces of correspondence regarding speed and safety along Lochside Drive. Councillor Garnett requested they be raised to correspondence. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I wanted to provide comment on this simply because it's not the first batch of letters we've received from the community. And the first batch was from the residents in Bakerview, which is actually North Saanich, but it's along the same stretch. And just wanted to let them know that it is something that's been considered. I have reached out to staff and had some questions answered. I do walk that area twice a week, so I'm aware of the concerns they're speaking of. And there is a plan to have a reader board if our budget is passed next week through, I think, the Ministry of Transportation Infrastructure with our town staff. So that will be happening to help hopefully address some of the concerns around speed. And as staff had mentioned in their letter, we don't control the speed limits on there. That is the ministry responsibility. We can provide input and things like to that nature, but they ultimately have the final decision. And as far as the crosswalk at Frost and Lochside, which has been mentioned several times in the letter, and yes, it can be a bit of a wait. Cars, as mentioned in the letters, I think I've noticed myself, are looking out towards the ocean, and you just don't step out, is my advice. Just making sure you have eye contact, and the cars have stopped. But we have in our active transportation plan to put flashing lights there, and it's number 4 in the priority queue. And the first 2 are already grant funded this year, so they can't go forward. But I'm advised by staff that if that extra funding comes forward, and if there's staff capacity, it can be pushed forward. But likely it's going to happen in 2025. We can push ahead of number 3. So just to let the residents know that it is an issue that is being considered, and it is an important consideration given the extra volume of traffic and the speeds that occur in that area, and that as from a safety perspective, staff is on top of it and are looking to move forward with that crosswalk to help. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Any further comments or questions from colleagues? I'll turn to Ms. Nelson. Given that we raised it to correspondence, do we require a motion to receive? Okay, I will move on to the next items, which are under correspondence for information. The remaining letters we're receiving on our agenda this evening. There's no motion required. Council, that does conclude our business for this evening. I would look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you, Council. Thank you, staff. Thank you, members of the public.